All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another CMSWire webinar. My name is Michael Tarapchak, and I'm here today to help answer any general or technical questions that you may have. But before we get started, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, How to Build a Solid Knowledge Foundation for AI Success. Here's today's timing breakdown. These numbers are just rough, so don't hold us to these. At any point during today's webinar, if you have a question, please don't hesitate to submit those using the Q&A tab that is on the right side of your screen. And you can also chat with your fellow attendees by clicking the public chat that is also on the right side of your screen. We have also made a few resources available to you in the Docs tab, so feel free to check those out. And then here's a little bit about us here at CMSWire. We were founded in 2003 and cover the primary topics that you see here on this slide. You can read some of our great content and register for upcoming conferences and webinars, all by visiting www.cmswire.com. And then I want to thank today's sponsor, Procedureflow, for making today's webinar possible. Procedureflow simplifies knowledge management by turning complex processes into visual guides that are easy to navigate while ensuring they remain accurate, collaborative, and compliant. Procedureflow's visual and strategic approach to maintaining standard operating procedures helps organizations deliver trusted knowledge that scales and drives operational efficiencies. Clearly guided processes combined with task automation helps employees quickly grasp critical details and execute requests with confidence. Create a unified knowledge source that anyone can navigate and count on to deliver exceptional service. You can learn more at www.procedureflow.com. And okay, it's time to introduce our speaker today. I'm joined by Sarah Jeanneault, VP Marketing at Procedureflow. And Sarah, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Hi, Michael. Thanks for having me here today. And hi to everyone who has joined the webinar. I'm kind of curious, where is everybody logging in from? If you want to type in the chat room. I see somebody here from Halifax.
Yep, feel free to type where you're from. It's always interesting seeing where our audience is from. We get people from all over the world. But I wanted to go ahead and get started here today, Sarah, with our first question. This is going to be more of a fireside chat style webinar for everyone. So I'm going to be here joining for the long haul today. But Sarah, the first question that I have for you is AI adoption in customer experience is exploding. But you said that we're hitting a gap between expectations and results. So what is happening here?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really trendy, and these conversations right now, everybody's adding in AI, and this is going to solve pretty well everything. And the reality is that there are many companies that are putting AI into their systems, but it's not actually hitting the reality of what they're looking for, right? So every organization is looking for efficiencies. They're looking for ways to improve that CX experience. And I think what's happened is sometimes people think that AI can be the all Band-Aid solution for everything. But we really need to think about it, because it absolutely has a lot of potential and can absolutely provide a lot for organizations. But what we're seeing in the real world versus, what I think people probably forecasted are different. I mean, CMSWire's own research was saying that AI in CX jumped from 11% to 32% in a single year. But at the same time, 16% of leaders now say AI has little to no impact on CX. So, I mean, that's kind of disappointing that there's hype about this is something that we should do, but it really isn't delivering. And the reason sometimes that's happening is because the information that's getting fed into AI is often outdated or inconsistent, and sometimes siloed information is actually magnifying what AI can provide. I throw out another statistic that you can see on the slide also, that a study found that 77% of corporate knowledge is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And that's the exact kind of content that causes AI to generate errors and to hallucinate or to provide conflicting answers.
Yep, and I wanted to go ahead and share our first poll today on screen. So with that being said, what is your organization today with AI in customer experience? So a few options here for you, and you can vote on the upper right-hand side, right where it says poll. We haven't started evaluating. Early experimentation and pilots, scaling AI across teams, mature programs with measurable ROI, and then we paused or pulled back after mixed results. Sarah, do you have any thoughts on some of the answers we have coming in for this poll?
Yeah, I just want to take a peek. And I don't know if everyone feels comfortable, but it'd be great also in the chat if you want to put a little bit of like your industry. So what are you coming from in terms of answering the question? Because I think that's something we're really discovering here at Procedureflow is different industries are on different critical paths as they implement AI. And organizations like ours work really well to tailor where you are on your digital journey and helping to support that knowledge foundation as you integrate AI into your pieces. And so I think that's so critical to also discuss is that everybody, because I can see all sorts of different industries here, and I can tell you already that everybody here is in a very different spectrum of how they're implementing AI and the successes that they're seeing because of where you're at. And if you really, it makes sense, right? We think about different industries needing and requiring to update things at different times, whether or not you're regulated or not regulated. And all of those things are going to mean that your documents, the pieces that are moving in to support the AI are also going to be updated at different periods of time. So it makes sense to me that we're seeing a bit of difference because I can see here in the chat. So thanks everybody for sharing. And that's very critical. In terms of deciding who you're going to use or how to support you moving forward in your AI journey, I think it's important that you're asking vendors, are you understanding that where I'm at might be different than where somebody else is at in that space, and making sure that they're meeting you where you are to help you grow into the next stage, as opposed to just, there's some blanket answer for everything. So, I mean, and that kind of leads me into the next question when you were asking about like, why does AI fail when organizations kind of lack that experience to be in it? And really it has to do with knowledge governance, right? And really thinking about why are we adding AI in the first place? What are the goals we're really working for? And then what is actually happening to build into that space? So AI entirely depends on accuracy and structure of information that it's consuming. And so when it gets different knowledge that isn't maybe accurate, what happens is there's a lot of hallucinations. The answers aren't always right, but we're kind of told, oh, AI is always right. It knows everything. And there is that piece. So understanding governance to make sure that your policies are in circulation, you don't have conflicting processes that are being fed into AI, all of the pieces are updated, and that you don't have siloed systems. And that's another thing that can be magnified in AI is sometimes organizations don't realize that what is happening in one department is actually very different than another. And if everyone's feeding into their structure, this is how we do things, then AI suddenly has different answers that aren't always accurate. The other thing to consider, right, when we're talking about the importance of knowledge governance is context, is understanding what your business does. And even sometimes down to some little things like even just words, right? Like one word, for example, in trading and options, a call has to do with the structure of a trade, is something you're going to do, but everyone else might know call as in phone. And AI, and it sounds funny, but it's these little pieces that are so important that AI needs to be taught the context of the business in order for it to also give you the answers. And so what might be happening in one silo department and another one, and how they have that context of what they mean by perhaps the same word, AI doesn't know that. And so really being mindful of, even though we're putting in all sorts of money into AI, the data that's moving into and being trained is so critical. And if you just skip ahead and just pile it all in with really examining what knowledge is going into AI, the results of that is actually just the opposite of the outcomes that generally the business is looking for, because it does end up basically with poor answers, poor inputs. Another interesting stat here, like Gartner estimates that poor data quality costs organizations an average of $12.9 million per year.
Wow.
Like that is significant. And this is like the answer, this is supposed to be the answer that creates all the efficiencies, but actually it's not really doing that. Another one, like MIT reports that 95% of organizations see zero return on their $40 billion investment in generative AI. Like, this isn't little dollars. This is big spend. It's pretty staggering.
Yeah, that's a lot of money lost for a tool that's supposed to help you save money, to be honest with you. You kind of talked a little bit about governance. So a question I have for you, Sarah, is knowledge governance is a phrase we're hearing more often, but definitions definitely vary when it comes to that. So how do you define knowledge governance?
Thank you for saying that. And you know what? I want to like throw this out there. Like, sometimes people are afraid to say, this term is thrown out all the time, but I don't really understand what you mean by the term. And sometimes having the bravery in our organization to be like, okay, what do you truly mean by that is really helpful in order for us to actually make some like forward projections of like, what is it we're talking about? And then how can we solve it? So when I'm talking about knowledge governance, I'm talking about the structure of the organization is using to ensure that knowledge is accurate, that it's compliant, that it's aligned to business goals. So really what we're talking about is clear ownership, like who owns what. And then cycles, like how many times are we really reviewing the cycle to make sure that that is actually accurate. And then also standards for accuracy, format, like how are things actually on paper within, and making sure things are accessible, also really important. And then I guess the process that ensures knowledge stays updated is important, because sometimes in transformation, we move ahead with outcomes that are linked to revenue or efficiencies and these big top line headlines. But sometimes it's the day to day as things get updated that those processes need to move along with those changes. And it's important that there's a process to actually stop and say, okay, did we move? Did we change or shift things here? So a lot of times what you see are silo systems or fragmented data, or we've moved ahead with the top line, but we actually haven't continued on with like the pieces. So I often think about like a recipe, right? So if we're going to bake, I love making sourdough bread. And it's interesting because sourdough requires very specific measurements. And so we can look at a recipe, and at the top, it has like the descriptions of like, this is what you're going to make and this is how you're going to do it. But it's still critical that you have like a quarter cup of salt and the exact individual measurements. And so I think if you think about that in the same way of governance, we can have the top line, what we're trying to do, the results we're trying to measure in the business, but we need the structure in place with the operational knowledge that is more prescriptive of how things are actually done. And thinking about it like those little measurement pieces in a recipe are so critical to ensure that you have the success, the beautiful loaf at the end. If you just kind of wing it or you just try to push it through, you're not always going to get the results you're looking for. So I guess, it's really all about sourdough bread.
That's awesome. Everyone loves sourdough bread, am I right? But with that being said, I wanted to get into our second poll here, and we'll get that on screen. So how would you rate the current state of knowledge governance at your organization? So we talked a little bit about that. A couple of the options we have here are we have no formal governance. We have partial governance. We have a governance plan, but it's mostly inconsistently followed. We have a strong governance plan with clear ownership, and then we are not sure. So I think right now, Sarah, I'll let you talk about this a little bit, but it seems like we have a little bit of a race here between we have a partial governance plan and we have a governance plan, but it's inconsistently followed.
Yeah, I mean, and that's quite common because sometimes what you have are leaders, like senior leaders, are saying we're going to move ahead with this, but then you have that lagging of the actual process, the implementation of that piece as we move forward. I'd say like 90% of CX leaders agree that employee digital experience kind of directly affects customer experience. We know that. And we know that knowledge sits at the heart of that. But then we have results. So as things are being implemented, what happens, leaders will say things like, we have agents with conflicting answers. We have processes that are varying by teams. We have people who've been in the roles for a long time, a lot of tribal knowledge that is something that we're relying on those people for answers, but isn't always something that is transferable because it's just been relying on whomever that one person that knew that answer for that specific requirement. And I think what's happening too, that's kind of the reality is as we're integrating this in our organizations is you're seeing burnout because the piece that was supposed to add the efficiency in the organization, AI, is actually creating more work and more frustration because it's surfacing the problems that sometimes, let's say Joe or whoever like knew all the information could kind of just handle quietly, because you could always go off and ask them. But that doesn't really work in AI. And so what we think is something that is supposed to be the solution can sometimes bring this up. And that's why when you're moving in through your AI transformation, these governance pieces of what you think everything is okay, it actually ends up surfacing more problems than we realize.
And I wanted to get into here a little bit about how does governance influence the human side? So things like agents, employees, and customer experience. What do you think about that?
It's so interesting again, right? Because I think there's a couple elements here. There's one with AI and people worried that it's going to just replace people, and it's worried it's going to remove that emotional intelligence, the empathy part of the delivery when you're talking about customer experience. But that isn't the case, especially as we see different organizations working together with AI as we move forward. And I think it's a natural process because we're just kind of seeing what happens. And having that growth mindset in an organization is actually more critical than ever, by having the understanding that we're moving into this. And it's not failing if it's not working, but it's important for us to have critical processes of examining how that implementation is going to make sure that are we still hitting on what we are trying to achieve at the end, or are we getting caught up? And then not saying, you know what, we've gone through a cycle here, we've integrated this and it's not actually working, but I'm not giving up on it, but actually saying, okay, now what do we need to stop? What structures do we need to put in place? How do I break this down to actually be accessible for the teams that I'm working with? How do we find a few wins in here and then be able to begin and scale again?
Perfect. I think a good majority of it is just trying to stop all of the friction. Sometimes when you're dealing with new AI tools, right? I mean, I think we just had ChatGPT 5 come out. So that comes with a lot of changes of implementation. So it's just about stopping the friction between both your processes and then those silos. So I think
Yeah,
that
and also just being okay with it. I mean, think about us, like just for a minute, like we're all working all the time. And
Mhm.
one, there's a bit of anxiety in what AI could or could not do or replace or not replace. And then the expectation of change and how that's really helping us be reflective of what our day-to-day is, when many times we would have just done the work. And now we're really being asked to shift and change again. And I think that's important to put there too, because we're still human beings, and that is still the process as we move in organizations, because we're all looking to do the best. Whether you're a leader or you're an implementer on a day-to-day basis, everybody wants to do their absolute best in an organization. And we want to find all the right answers. And I think AI isn't like a one and done. It's an opportunity to have more conversations to figure out even further efficiencies as we move forward, and not being afraid of the change, but also recognizing in our teams that we're asking them a lot, and to be mindful of how someone is still feeling within an organization and ensuring there's still operational efficiencies in that.
I love it. And then that kind of leads me into our next thing. What are the risks of doing nothing? So what happens if an organizations continue without strong governance at all?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there's two. There's operational risks and there's strategic risks. And and then, I mean, I think off the top, everyone's like, well, this has to be the answer to everything because it's always mentioned. So one is understanding that we are going to have an expertise lost in the workplace. So by I think it's 2030, 61 million baby boomers will retire. And
Wow.
what's going to happen is they're going to take a lot of that institutional knowledge with them if we don't have that piece really governed, really documented correctly in a way that can actually help future generations moving forward. And so I was alluding to it before when we were talking about Joe and always going to the one person for some of those specific answers. It's important that all of that piece is documented. So just the process of moving through proper governance of knowledge is essential. And you don't want to do it too late when Joe's already retired and gone. You need to make sure that you had that ahead of time. And again, sometimes you don't know what you don't know until that piece is gone. And so ensuring that you've really done that. The other piece is compliance and security risks. So we do have to deal with data privacy, cybersecurity, all of these new elements. And so we do need to ensure that there's processes in place that's protecting these pieces. And this is absolutely critical for CX leaders as we move ahead. And I'd say almost there's probably more today than there were 20 years ago in terms of data privacy that we're dealing with, or ensuring that compliance regulatory levels are probably a little bit more intense than they used to be. So we need to make sure that we are complying with those pieces and that we're still able to be efficient and produce the results while also staying compliant and managing that risk.
Awesome. And then I wanted to get into our third poll here. So that leads into, what is the biggest challenge for your team today? Your team today faces regarding the knowledge today. So outdated or inconsistent content, the lack of ownership for updates, too many systems or tools, or it's just hard to maintain accuracy at scale.
Yeah, I'm so curious to see everyone's answer on this one.
Yeah, it seems like we have an early lead for hard to maintain accuracy at scale. Again, with so many and so many tools, it's tough because we do have so many tools. AI is kind of still in the newer phases, right? We have so many different tools coming out, so many different ways of handling these tools, different procedures, different silos, friction. So it's interesting to see that already took the lead there. The scale of it is so immense at this point.
It's so true, and constantly evolving and changing, shifting too. So yeah, this is really interesting.
All right. We'll keep the polls going there. But I wanted to get into kind of our next question here, and that is, let's move to solutions. So what does strong knowledge governance actually look like?
Yeah, and I'm glad we're talking about this, because I think everyone, sometimes we're so good, or just human nature is sometimes good about identifying the problems, but not really focused on the solution. So we want to make sure that you're walking away today with some actual concrete ways to make sure that you have a knowledge governance framework in your organization. And so the first step, I'd say, is you need to assess the knowledge. Like, where are you at today? And sometimes that is a really hard thing to be reflective of. Like, what content do we have? What are we talking about? What is going to be moving into AI in terms of training, or feeding AI in terms of processes moving forward? And then when you look at, like, what is that content, look at some of the dates, look at some of is anything expired? Have there been old escalation paths that are actually duplicated now because something newer has come in terms of the solution, but that previous pathway is still sitting there? And that's going to create, again, that duplication and wrong answers down the road. So that is really important. But that is, I'm going to throw out another story. I think, and I'm going to call my own bluff on this one, I guess. But if I look at how many times I spend time on my laptop organizing the folders on my desktop, there are times where I've got a lot of individual files sitting on my desktop that I don't actually kind of get around to organizing properly. And I can't be the only one. I'm sure there's many of you out here too. We all get busy, and then we start saying, okay, well, I'm just going to put this here for now. I know where it is, and I'm going to go back to this at a later date. And that might be true when I at least first put it on my desktop, but I don't always go back and really make sure it's organized. And then over time, you just get so many files on your desktop and it looks a little messy. Or you could use an example of, like, looking at a purse and how many times you really clean it all out and make sure it's organized. And I think it's the same time. And sometimes it's a little overwhelming when your first stage is looking at the content you have in your organization, putting it all out there on a table. One, it's going to feel like a lot. Two, you're going to find all sorts of things that you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh, this piece here. Oh, that process is a bit different than this one. And so doing that is important, not being ashamed of putting it all out there, but first being like, okay, this is the content I'm working with. Then thinking about what's missing. Are there any processes? Are there any steps in the processes today, now that I have it out here, sitting here, that actually maybe doesn't make sense? Or redundant? Are there redundant documents here? Actually, is it time to delete something? That is critical in our conversations about that knowledge governance. And then being critical of risk. So now that we've looked at some of the current state of knowledge, what is different in terms of like our risk profile? Has anything shifted or changed there? Is there something that needs to be removed or changed altogether before we go and feed that into AI? So I would say like that's step number one, assess your current state. Number two is develop a content strategy that's aligned with your business goals. So the goal here isn't just to clean it up and put it in some folders so it looks pretty. We're trying to clean up some of these processes and structures to make sure that it's moving into AI and it's actually going to produce the results we're looking for. So start with define what type of knowledge matters most to you, what content is structured and what isn't currently structured, and then how are you going to have a maintenance plan? What maintenance plan and what kind of type? So things like pricing or features or support steps, that's a critical one. And sometimes support steps can be a little messy. Just what is there areas here that are missing? Has risk in the last few years since this has been written changed? And so are there any areas or gaps that need to be filled? And then operational knowledge like flows, escalation paths, any of those things need to be updating. So we really want to do that. Then establish clear ownership. Who in the organization is going to own this piece, the individual piece, and who is owning the opportunity to review and creating a timeline to review it, who is owning that piece and who is owning the implementation. Number four is you want to create objectives, like real metrics. And this isn't just like our final product, but how are we creating something that's valuing the performance as we move through that? Remember, we talked about that before. The piece of AI isn't just like a one and done. It's an opportunity to look back at what we're doing more than one time as we're building that knowledge governance. So what is not only the timeline of review of the metrics, but what is the success criteria that we are going to evaluate from as we implement? And then finally, I would say like committing to this growth mindset or this continuous improvement. So it isn't a one and done solution. What are the cycles we're going back and reviewing? How do we make sure that we're keeping knowledge updated? Our products and services are reflective of what we do today, and there isn't duplication of that process.
I think a big thing here is just staying organized, right? It comes with finding those tools that you want to use, those strategies that you so choose to pick, and then just getting aligned with it, establishing, like you said, that clear ownership goal, and then set the objectives. It's important to set your objectives and your performance metrics, what you plan on reaching here. And then just the last step, like you said, committing to it. Being able to attack it day in and day out. Don't leave it sitting at your desktop, right? And say you're going to attack it one day and then maybe attack it a week later. Just continuously attacking it and making sure you stay committed to that goal. And
yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah, I was just going to say, like, even when you think about that, sometimes even just the terms of what we're saying now, it sounds really simple. You always need to go back to it. But sometimes it's hard to create the habits to do these pieces that are critical for the organization. And sometimes the process of creating the habits is the harder stuff to do, but recognizing that it's harder, but it'll get easier as you build in those opportunities to review for that continuous improvement. I'm just going to throw out another story, but I love running, and running doesn't always love me. I'm not the kind of person, although my husband is, it drives me nuts, but my husband can decide in 3 weeks he's going to run 30 kilometers. For me, I have to train for that for a very long time. And it's a process of continuously going out there, training, pushing a bit further, training, pushing a bit further. And so for people as CX leaders, I think there is a direct link to things like that. One, think about goals that you have set in your own life and who are you and how do you achieve those goals? Most of us can't just say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to have knowledge governance. Then the next day, perfect AI, best efficiency ever. Like, it's just not real. What's real is that ability to look at us from our day to day and say, okay, well, how do I break down some of the knowledge that we're doing? How do I make sure that we're helping teams to make sure that there is some good structure and flow in our process so that eventually we're moving this into this incredible AI finish line? There is no real finish line in this process. We can celebrate wins as we elevate into various goals that we're creating for the organization, but the ongoing continuous need to assess our knowledge, to develop the strategy, then to create some success criteria, celebrate the wins, but then have that continuous improvement is so critical in not just this, but in all areas of business and our lives, really.
Very true. And Sarah, I wanted to get into our next topic at hand here, and that is let's talk about the opportunity. With this foundation in place, what becomes possible then? Does AI become a true CX co-pilot?
Well, I think that's what everybody wants it to be, and it absolutely can be. But it's the same analogy, I guess, as like the marathon or the bigger goal is you need to have that process to be able to get there. AI can't create accuracy when there's no accuracy that exists in the first place. So it's not going to suddenly solve all the world's problems, your organization's problems, without it being fed and inputted correct information from the beginning. It will find efficiencies when it has a good governed knowledge structure that is moving into that, then to be able to produce the outputs we're looking for. So yes, it's possible. And I think it's absolutely part of future proofing our workplace. Like it is here to stay. It is a continuous change and evolution in how we create work and how we deliver output within our organizations. But again, recognizing the industry you're in, the process, the place that you're in terms of where you are in your implementation, understanding that this is a growth stage as we move through that and it's going to create ongoing support is absolutely critical. Because if you don't do all those things, I hope what I've hammered home is you get the bad sourdough bread. You never get to achieve the run. You don't actually hit the metrics you're looking for in an organization, and you end up being disappointed because you've expected all AI to solve all your problems when what it actually ends up doing is amplifying some of those pieces. And in order to avoid that, pulling it back a little bit, looking at what that governance is, that structured knowledge that we've created. And as it moves in, we avoid the hallucinations that we don't want AI to provide.
Exactly. It's all about the journey. Sometimes it's awesome to see the finished picture and want to understand what that looked like and see it right away, but it's all about the journey to getting there. And that kind of leads me into our next poll question for the chat. So what area do you think will benefit most with improved knowledge governance? So outdated or inconsistent content, lack of ownership for updates, too many systems or tools, hard to maintain accuracy at scale, or preparing for workforce turnover. Right, we'll get those poll results going. All right, and it looks like we already have outdated and inconsistent content and too many systems or tools so far took the lead. All right. And then, Sarah, I wanted to get into the next question, and that is, what's one message you have for CX leaders to walk away with for today?
I want leaders to not be afraid, to understand that this is a process that is doable, that is something that you can absolutely see efficiencies in terms of your longer term growth and strategy. You can scale this, you can scale AI responsibly, but it does require some work off the top to make sure that it is going to actually reduce your operational risk in the end by, like we said, by sitting down and being very reflective of what is that framework that we're producing in the first place to make sure that you're getting the results. But I do think it's there. I think that's the reality. And for us to say it's never going to happen isn't true. I mean, it's just, this is what was happening in the industry. So it's about making sure that we're always looking at this from a growth mindset and understanding that you can get a very effective ROI. It is possible in AI, but AI isn't magic. It still does require good knowledge to be fed into it.
Awesome. All right. I wanted to get into a little bit of Q&A here now that I have you. So audience, feel free to submit some Q&A questions for Sarah to go ahead and answer, as she is the AI expert on everything governance. I wanted to go ahead and get started with this one, Sarah. So, how should organizations strike the right balance between AI automation and human expertise, especially when knowledge is constantly changing?
Yeah, I mean, and AI can't solve all your problems like that, right? So there's always this kind of push and pull with AI and then humans, and is everything going to take over, and is it not, and where is that balance? And I think we also thinking about like empathy and all this pieces about makes us human. Like that still exists, and that still needs to move forward in our world. So that is still we still want to own that within the organization. And so I really think it's a balance, right? It's about strong knowledge governance, which we've talked about here in terms of the process, and AI tools can amplify an organization, but I don't think at this point it's replacing the organization. So, how can you work with the strengths, with the expertise you have in your organization to be able to lean into the areas of which you can have the biggest amounts of growth? And you want to make sure that we're setting AI up so that it is setting up your organization to have the efficiencies and as opposed to just creating all sorts of errors for you. And so we want you to be successful in your organization. And in terms of that implementation, it is so important that we recognize that AI isn't the stamp of the solution for everything, but really it is the ability to be reflective of where are the strengths in my organization, what are the areas for opportunity in terms of building efficiencies, so that the customer at the end of the day, it's really about them, right? Because they are building your business. So what are areas that you have in your organization that you can lean into? Where can we put those AI processes to find efficiencies too, but still working with humans and meeting the culture of the organization where they're at as you help them to move forward and be innovative?
And then, speaking of organizations, Chanel had a great question in here. She says, my company is allowing us to have AI Fridays where we have basically all afternoon to learn AI. Where do I start and encourage my team to start?
Well, I think let's celebrate that win right now. For an organization to give you and your team time to learn is incredible. And sometimes, I don't know if you, but sometimes we all are pushing so hard to get somewhere that we don't actually have a lot of time to put in with our teams to say, actually, you can learn this, and you can learn this in a way that makes it work for you. So I do think, as a leader, Chanel, you want to create some success criteria for yourself. So if we know the answer is, okay, I want my team to learn all about AI, that's a huge statement. So then let's create some success criteria for yourself. What are some things for you as a leader that you want to stay ahead of your team? Are there specifically 3 or 4 things within the next, let's say, business cycle, and whether that's a quarter for you or a 6-week cycle, you determine that and say, within the end of this period of time, for me, this is what I want to have learned. And then from there, shape those goals specifically to maybe it's some reflective questions at the end of this 6-week cycle or the end of this quarter. You're going to ask your team about what they've learned in terms of how they'll implement AI in that piece. Because I think as leaders, we still want to be building up our team so that they feel that they have answers, that they have confidence in being able to find solutions in the organization. And so while AI can provide some of these answers, we as leaders can also be encouraging great conversation, because those team members, as they're learning, should be able to identify what they have learned and then how that actually can be implemented within their organization. And sometimes that conversation alone will surface some of those duplication of processes that AI is going to find anyways, and it'll surface it ahead of time. It'll alleviate anxiety that employees or team members might be having because they're worried that AI is going to replace everything, which it won't. And then they'll feel like they have confidence to continue to have great conversations with you as a leader, to continue to find other solutions for the business so that we can all continue to service our clients and see the ROI that we're looking for in terms of growth of that business.
Awesome. And then Madeline also had a question here. She asks, how do you recommend navigating resistance in AI? So you talked about that a little bit there, even in that answer, in ourselves and in our teammates when we all just feel so unsure.
We all do. And you know what? I'm just going to say it. I think it's okay to say, you know what? I might not have all the answers here for this one, but what I have is the ability to think critically and I want to try. One thing that I always live in life is the only difference between a dream and a goal is a timeline. So instead of looking at AI as saying this is the everything and the be all right now, I'm going to identify in my team how willing are we to step into a few key pieces? Where are some stuff we're comfortable trying and implementing? And then what is a stretch goal? And then as a leader, we're responsible for moving the teams into that stretch piece of really where we're trying to get them go, which is sometimes further than some of our teams are expecting that we can go. So I would say acknowledging where we're at, being okay with a bit of vulnerability as we're all taking risks and using and integrating AI into our future state, because nobody has the exact answers of where it's all going, but we do know we need to be on that learning cycle of that continuous improvement. And even if you remove AI for a moment, all organizations will go through times where it needs to restructure in order to make sure it's continuing to grow. And AI right now is a vehicle of a conversation of how we can find efficiencies, but recognizing change management as a leader. Where is your team at currently? How far can I push them? What supports can we put in place so that is still successful for everyone? And then what does the business need? And how do we make sure we move forward? But I'm also going to say, this stuff, it's not an easy, a one conversation and over, one and done scenario. It really is about encouraging growth. And I think it really comes back to that growth mindset that we're building in teams, to say, do I have that critical ability to sit down and spend some time examining all those folders on my desktop to make sure that I'm cleaning and organizing, to make sure that then I'm feeding the innovation that we're looking for within an organization?
So another question we have here is from Jordan, and he is asking, once we have this knowledge government already in place, so it's already set up and in place, then what should be step 2 when adding AI to your tech stack?
So, everyone's tech, that's going to be very specific to where an individual organization is. So I think it'd be hard without me looking at some of the specifics to give you a specific answer there. And I'm sure that's what he's looking for. But what I'd say is, again, it's not a one and done piece. So where is the cycle of which you're looking for that continuous improvement? So this step is an AI implementation check, and then I move on. The step is, where have I broken down these processes and moving in terms of this area that I'm now integrating AI? How do I have that reflective conversation about making sure there's efficiencies in what I've implemented? And then where in the next tech stack can I go? And so I think you as a leader also need to think about, where do you want to go first? Is it better to go high and hard in terms of that very highly regulated area that you're looking to integrate and then work down? Or do you want to go from simple and then get more complicated in what you're looking for it to do? So maybe think about who you are as a leader. How much of a stretch are you looking to integrate in that organization? What's possible? What do you think is possible? What do you think is the stretch? And where do you want to see the wins? And the wins aren't going to come everywhere all at once. It's going to be through that process of change. And how are you at implementing change management in your organization also? Something to be very mindful of.
Every situation is a little bit different, and it's just important to take a step back and kind of evaluate your certain situation and then just take it from there. Sarah, I want to ask one more Q&A question before we close today, and that's from Angela. She asks, how will the measure of ROI of AI, how will we measure the ROI of AI, and what are key performance indicators of that ROI?
So I would encourage every organization to make sure that you are creating those that are personalized to the structure you're in. Again, we're talking about all sorts of different industries, so I don't think I can give you 1, 2, 3, but what your annual goals are in terms of your organization. Your your quarterly strategy of what you're trying to achieve. And so we need to think about, of those that you're trying to achieve, where can we add these pieces in? which one can I actually get done? Where can, in terms of innovation, you also have a budget that you're working towards. So where does it make more sense to implement that is allowing you to show that you can continue to do more? I mean, obviously what we want as leaders is we're implementing elements of AI and then being able to show, because you've had that incremental piece of ROI, we want more funding to be able to do that even more because we want further efficiencies. All of this should be producing positive results for you. And as you do that, hopefully we're all growing and everything is getting better and better. So what are some of those goals that you're making sure you hit? And I see someone else is also talking about cybersecurity threats. I also want to throw that out there too. If you're working in a very regulated industry where there are very specific requirements that we need to make sure that AI is not getting wrong or not making it up, that process to educate AI to make sure that the content is going to be very different there than in something that isn't as regulated. And it's so critical that you examine who you are and what answers are you looking for AI to provide within the organization to make sure you're not opening yourself up to more risk, especially something like cybersecurity, to making sure that this is actually set up correctly so that this is giving you stuff that's not opening up to exposure. That is a critical piece for us to examine as leaders about where are we doing it, because both is possible, but the process in order to get to the result is going to be different depending on the industry you're in. And sometimes I think maybe we innately as humans compare. So we might compare one industry to another and say, well, this industry integrated AI this way, so this is how I should do it too. But instead of that kind of mindset, thinking critically of what are the business goals that I'm responsible for, how can I help support this individual business, and then where can I do it? And being okay to hold the space that the way that AI might be integrated in one organization actually might be very different than another. And that's okay, because we're not all on the same journey of integration and innovation. We have to own the different strengths that our businesses have and make sure that, again, you're working with vendors that are hitting you where you need the supports in order to make sure that your business is successful.
Wow, this has all been very, very insightful. I wish we could keep going, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. I want to thank Sarah for being here and Procedureflow for sponsoring today's webinar. And last but not least, truly, thank you all in the audience for your time and attention today. Just a reminder, today's webinar was recorded and you'll be receiving a link to that recording in a follow-up email, so keep an eye on your inbox for that. But in the meantime, thank you all once more, and we will see you on the next one. Goodbye, everyone.